Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Nick.
It's great to have you on board. So I've been wanting to get somebody from a support team for a long time, and especially yourself, because I know you're part of a big support team, which I'll ask you to talk about in a second or so. But also wanted to understand, what's happening in the market now in comparison to where we were, and what do you think is going to be the future effect on support teams? But first of all, tell us a little about yourself.
I'm Catherine Tallis. I am the Director of Business Services at HFL Education. And we are a spin out of Hertfordshire County Council. So this is our 10th year, actually. We're going to have a 10th year, a sort of decade of existence this year. And the part that I look after is, I guess, everything that is non-teaching and learning. So we've done really well in Hertfordshire to kind of preserve the entirety of school improvement and education support services. So I've got 6 teams that cover sort of technology, data management, which obviously relates to MIS, HR services, business management, financial management, and governance. So it's a really, really interesting kind of eclectic mix of services. And prior to working for HFL Education, I was working in the leadership team at Hertfordshire County Council, which I think is really relevant to our chat because sort of before I joined HFL, I was the sort of the baddie in the council, kind of making these decisions about, okay, what do we preserve and what do we look to spin out? What do we send out to the market? Because austerity was having such an impact on our budget that we were having to make kind of some quite difficult decisions. And I suppose when we're talking about the changes in EdTech and MIS, it feels to me we're kind of at that place now. So yeah, I'm hoping that broader kind of background I've got, Nick, can kind of inform the discussion we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Busy by any chance for all those teams?
Yeah, it's great actually. It's the people that make your job, isn't it? And also the school. So I'm really, really privileged because I get to spend a lot of time out with schools, sort of talking to them about their needs and at the moment their woes really. But also with the team. So yeah, there's never a dull moment, but I think the longer you stay in a job, the more like family everybody sort of becomes. And yeah, so it's like I love it. I wouldn't change it for anything else, and I do like that variety. But yeah, sometimes you just do wish that the world might kind of slow down a little bit, and you can sort of take a step off the treadmill. But no, I wouldn't swap it for anything.
No, it's brilliant. And I know, obviously, I've met a lot of your team and stuff, so I know your team quite well and yourself. And so, yeah, no, it's a great team. Definitely a fantastic team that you have there. It was great that you were willing to come on board because I really wanted to talk about, the current effects, I suppose, that are happening on support teams. If I for people who are listening in, I just want to give a bit of background. There was a point when I was working at Sims where, and this is probably I'm only talking probably about 5 to 10 years ago, between that sort of time period, and support teams were absolutely everything to us. Because from a Sims perspective, if I'm being honest, and this is people probably didn't understand this, you were almost like a bit of a barrier. There's 22,000 schools we had, and ultimately we were talking to about 160 local authorities, which obviously makes sort of managing that number of schools much easier. You were supporting them, you were basically giving them really strong service, which had a reflection on our software, which is good. They got the most out of that software. And that barrier was also important when we did things wrong, if I'm being honest, because it meant that basically, you were the people who were delivering the message to the schools. And so, yeah, you may have got some of that flack maybe, but you'd push it back to us. But also it was like fingers into lots of different schools and lots of different needs. So from a product perspective, we'd meet, say, 160 of our customers, which yourselves, and then we got basically almost 22,000 schools worth of requirements in that. So it was a good, basically a symbiotic relationship that we had, which was really strong for us, and it was really powerful because it enabled us to probably be stronger in the market for a much longer period of time, even when we were really not delivering for you guys in the sense of software and things and services. So for me, what's changing at the moment is quite fundamentally had an impact on probably ESS especially. But where do you see the way the market is at the moment, and what do you think are the big impacts?
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I took my role up in the local authority, a lot of the work I did was around kind of governance and HR and finance, and I actually had relatively little to do with ed tech. So it was a steep learning curve when I came in 3 years ago, and our team obviously were working almost exclusively with Sims at that point, and you kind of just let them get on with it. It was really steady, and I guess I'd liken it a little bit to a dam, and that there was a kind of a little crack sort of appeared, and we started to have a couple of schools say, do you know what, we've heard about this new product called Arbor, we'd really like to go and try it, will you support it? So at that point we thought, do you know what, let's go and have a look at this. And so we kind of sought accreditation to Arbor, and I can only describe what's happened since. You know, this crack has kind of become a fissure, and then sort of, you know, the sort of tiny leak became a trickle, and then the trickle becomes and then suddenly it feels like last year the dam wall just went pow. And you know, we've sort of set up our own framework. We've moved 270 schools now over to other MIS products. It's been really, really busy, and I think that kind of cozy relationship you talk about, where there was only one game in town at one point, and this kind of symbiotic relationship, we've certainly seen that change, and I think Tracy, who heads up our sort of data management services team, would describe the year as interesting, but I think that's code for really, really challenging, because suddenly, we had to move 270 schools in a really short time frame.
Wow.
Far shorter than we would have chosen because of the kind of what was happening in the market. And so were we able to provide, the excellent service we pride ourselves on all the time? No, we had to compromise on quality, which was really uncomfortable for us, but we made a decision that, we would help as many schools move as possible. So sort of going from having this cozy relationship with our suppliers and the school, suddenly you're getting a bit of a kicking from both sides when things don't go well. So I think it looks very, very different. It does feel to me, and this sounds very dramatic, Nick, but we are approaching a bit of a cliff face now in this market. And I don't know how long it's going to take everyone to get to the cliff edge, but there's sort of two really big pull factors to me. And one is kind of, the change in the market, and just the fact that schools do want choice, but they also want value and they want excellent service. And actually being able to know multiple MISs inside out, back to front, intricately, and to be able to add level of value that's needed is no easy ask. So you've got to have a fairly large team to be able to do that. So I think some of the smaller support units out there are going to really start to struggle. And I gave the analogy of the dam wall, and I think I've spoken to a lot of support units this year who are sort of asking us about our framework and could they draw down on it. And they're kind of busy getting into their life rafts, putting their life jackets on, and those life jackets are kind of diversification. So they're all running up, getting accredited to various MISs so that they can kind of keep their schools. But how realistic that is into future, we shall see, because I think these geographical boundaries are no longer as important in the market, given the kind of rise of the multi-academy trust. So it's all going on at the moment, isn't it? But I think for me, the bigger pull factor this year, and the thing that really worries me, is just the precarious state of school finances. I've worked with schools in financial difficulty for about 12 years now. And when I first started, you could find a few $100,000 under the kind of, rocks in the budget, and it was okay. And there were some difficult decisions to make. We did kind of enact big redundancy programs when I was in the council. It was hard, but it's completely different now. I've never seen anything like this. And I think, the real crunch for schools is that their statutory responsibilities are static, and that's right that they are, because they are serving kind of communities and really, really key, but everything's falling down around them, and that sounds overly dramatic, but we can see, we see what's happening with the NHS in the news, so all of the kind of services that were kind of helping them, I guess, to keep things moving are crumbling, and they're having to keep things moving. And we're in this really sad situation now where a TA can go and work more in Marks and Spencers than they can working in a school, and the work they do is really, really vital. So schools have got to make these really tough decisions this year. Where do we invest our money, our precious money? And the thing that really worries me, and we're not immune from this, is are they going to kind of stick with their local support partner who they absolutely adore and they've been fiercely loyal to, or if there's another offer out there where they can reduce their support cost by 50%, it's a bit of a no-brainer really, because yes, you love the service, but on the other hand, you've got to keep your school going, you've got to keep the lights on, you've got to keep the pupils learning. And so I think that's a really significant pull factor this year. And I could see a number of, is the demand going to be there? I think there's also going to be some schools that say, do you know what, we're just going to manage without support this year, and we're just going to risk it. And I think, there are some core, so the way I see sort of education, there are some really core activities that schools will always buy. And, COVID, really transformed the way we think about ed tech in schools. It really genuinely did. But is technology in a parity with, say, school improvement services in a school? Absolutely not. So it worries me as well that some schools are just going to say, do you know what? These systems are a bit more intuitive now. I'll risk it and I'll kind of try and manage it myself. So I think that this year, it's there's changes in the market that mean that everything is kind of, sort of changing around us, but also that the lack of money in schools is going to really test support teams.
It's a bit of a double bind, though, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, if you're not getting the revenue in to support schools or support multiple MISs, then you're not going to deliver the value that you probably need to now. Because you're right, because schools are going to go, do you know what, this service was great, I love the people, but do you know what? I think, like you say, I can get away with not having support this year. So that means you need to show additional value. But the way to show additional value is time and a bit of money coming in to show that you can do additional services or deliver to what the needs of the school are. And how does a small team do that? I can appreciate that you've got full sort of school improvement services, but what about other teams?
Yeah, I think that's really, really hard. And I think that there's another factor you overlay. I mean, look, we're actually independent as HFL, so we are sort of entirely traded. We're sort of a schools owned company, so schools own us. But I know when I was sort of in the local authority, we were looking at, right, okay, is this our core business? Is it something is there a market out there that can do this as well, if not better? And if it's traded, is it it sounds crude, but is it making a profit? Is it washing its face? Is it bringing something back to the council that they can then reinvest into other kind of frontline services? And I think that the problem is now, Nick, that the latter, I think, was what was keeping lots of support teams going, and councils kind of supporting them. But if suddenly you see a massive drop in your revenue and you're having to hire new staff to kind of, to have that depth of quality across a number of systems, it's not going to be viable anymore. So sadly, I think this year could spell the end. That sounds very dramatic, but I think it could spell the beginning of the end for a number of the smaller support teams. And I think we'll end up with a bit of a consolidation in the market. And I think, that's the harsh reality of where we find ourselves.
Well, it's not just schools without money, is it? There's lots and lots of local authorities out there who are already in deficit as well. And ultimately, the SIM or the school MIS support is not statutory. So the statutory stuff they have to do is going to be priority number one, and just like schools. And then other services are going to be less prioritized. But if they can't make, like you say, wash their face, or make an element of money back in, I know they're not allowed to make profit, but money back into the authority, then you're right. I don't know where or how they can persist really in this sort of, like you say, it's dramatic, it's horrible, but I can't see how that can suffice. Do you think there's an element as well where support teams, where with SIMs it had to be done, there'd be a lot of case of, right, this is how you get that information out, or this is how you use SIMs basically. Do you think there needs to be an elevation of that sort of conversation above that now?
Definitely. I mean, I think one of the things we're learning through our diversification is that cloud products are far more intuitive. You download an app on your phone, and you don't tend to. One of my kids had an Xbox for Christmas. Amazing. So you get an app on your phone and you install, and configure the Xbox using the app on your phone. Didn't need to pick up the instructions at all. Didn't need to read them. Just totally intuitive. Did it all. And I think, in schools, we're starting to move that way as well. And I think it's inevitable that, when you haven't got to have patches and updates and, everything's done in real time, and you've got far more intuitive reports, you're not going to need the level of support we've seen in previous years. And so therefore, like with any business, it becomes about volume then. So, you know, in order to sustain yourself, you're needing to provide less support, but to more customers in order to kind of make yourself sustainable. So I definitely think that's the case. But I also think, you know, schools are sort of data-rich, information-poor organisations, and really excited. We're going to be sounds like I'm in the Arbor camp, but we're headlining. Rachel McFarlane and I, my colleague, are headlining Arbor Fest. So I've never headlined a festival before, so I'm very excited. Later this month, and we're talking about data democratisation, and we've kind of it's really kind of inspired me actually, because we've been talking about you know, we're doing it through the lens of race equity actually, and talking about, you know, schools have a lot of data, but is it in the hands of the right people at the right level? And, you know, for example, how many sanctions are schools handing out to children of colour every week? I bet, you know, it's in the MIS, but they've got no idea. And we're talking about actually, you know, how do you set a culture where, you know, people are asking curious questions of the data, they're able to access it, they're able to ask curious questions of their own performance, and that's all around sort of change management. So I think there's definitely a future for supporting data in schools, but it just might not be in the way that we've all come to know and love it, where someone's ringing you up and asking you how you do something in, you know, in Sims or Arbor or Scholarpack or Bromcom or Comfort. You know, I think it's going to look very different, and I think you know, schools are going to need to innovate, and we're going to need to innovate. So how do we democratise data? How do we ensure that they're making the right decisions and kind of, you know, so I think you're right. I think there's a step up and there's a sort of a change. So it's not all is not lost for teams, but they're going to have to be quite agile and adapt quite quickly.
I think that's brilliant, you know, and I'm well pleased that you're a part of Arborfest. I had a little feeling fest where you might have a, you know, guitar or something, but no, it's not one of those.
It's the wellies. It's the wellies.
But you know, you're absolutely right. I think data is really, really important. And actually, do you know what? There's really strange that you just talked about sort of that unconscious bias of, you know, of racism, basically. You know, the unconscious sort of racism, which, you know, you can say is unconscious or not. There was a few discussions I had with like Martin Baker from the Safeguarding Company around that, which is quite interesting. But I think the idea that basically we can learn and how, you know, how we teach children, you know, put more focus on where we're lacking in the sense of giving them the right level of attention and focus. It's a little bit like premium. I saw some data some time ago where it just shows, you know, basically, you know, where, you know, if you're from an ethnic minority, then ultimately, you know, you probably won't get as much of that money that you are actually given, you know, the school is given for you, as much as if you are a white child. So
absolutely. I think this stuff is all in the MIS, but it's all hidden. And I think that the difference between and it's fabulous having these conversations, but I think one of the things schools are amazing at is curriculum change. One of the things we always find that's quite challenging in schools is bedding change management in other things, systems, data, that kind of thing. And I think we're sort of going off a bit of a tangent really, but I think to really embrace the sort of the future and this idea of sort of data democratization and to get you know, to really affect change, because this doesn't cost anything, you know, kind of extracting the right data at the right time and putting it in the hands of, you know, we're talking about this perfect storm of financial pressures in schools. Well, this is something that we can add value to for schools for very little cost, but that requires a change in mindset, because actually recognizing your unconscious, you know, this is down to me as a teacher or a support staff member, that's really hard as well. So again, I think there's opportunity here for us as support teams to diversify, not just into this is how you democratize data, because actually it's about change management. And I think that's something that support teams have been awesome at over the last few years, you know, diversifying to different systems, but also, you know, adapting to sort of changing landscape. And, you know, sort of when software sometimes stands still, you know, you need to find new ways of doing stuff and extracting. So yeah, I think it's more than just data. It's about, you know, being able to support schools through change.
Yeah, that is really, really important. And that means you have to have change of conversation and communication. You know, so you need, you know, the sport teams are now going to need to basically highlight their worth to the schools or the CEOs or the MATs and so on, which means, unfortunately, you have to be quite good at marketing to a degree. You're going to have to be able to go, we know your needs, we know your pain, and actually we can help with this, this, and this by doing X, Y, and Z, rather than just going, yeah, by the way, we're a sport team, pay us, and we'll basically ensure that basically all your systems are working or your MIS is working.
And you're right. I mean, the threat we haven't talked about sort of in future, if you like, is the sort of the rise of the multi-academy trusts as well, because what we're finding as an organisation is a lot of the transactional work that we might have done around, for example, MIS is the trusts themselves are taking on. So we're working with one trust that's 12 schools, they've got 12 data managers. Well, they don't really need us because they've got 12 data managers that between them can provide that specialism. So one of them can take on assessment, one of them can take on sort of free school meals. I think we need to find different ways of appealing to them. So for us, it's then about that. Okay, so how do we add value? It's more in a kind of management consultancy capacity than it is perhaps in that transactional support. So I think the other big shift we're going to see is is a sort of move away from that kind of day-to-day sort of problem solving and sort of first line turn it on and turn it off again to much more kind of I think sort of strategic sort of advice and support. So it's going to be a bit of an education for all of us, I think, to lift ourselves up to a point where sort of trusts, for example, want to call down on our services because we've got this expertise across data, but we can kind of add value and do more than perhaps the data managers on the ground are capable of.
Yeah, so elevating the service you're offering almost. So you talked about the future. So where does the future lie then? We talked about the cliff edge potentially coming, which I know both of us, obviously, like I say, or you said probably better than I did, which is it's a dramatic thinking, thought, but, we've got to be realistic as well. Where do you see the services going? What do you see the landscape? Do you find that, do you perceive there's going to be fewer of the sport teams and so on? And, what do you see as a future landscape?
Yeah, so, we've been doing some thinking about this before we launched our framework, because I think we could see, it would have been sort of 18 months ago now, that the world wasn't going to look as it looked. Have we, did we have a crystal ball and did we sort of foresee the future? No, we got it quite wrong actually, but the kind of the safety net we put in place by moving to a sort of multi-supplier framework was sufficient. But I think sort of 18 months ago we saw that perhaps in the next sort of 5 to 10 years the market was likely to consolidate, the support team market was likely to consolidate into, say, 5, 6, 7 national players. And despite everything that's happened in the last sort of year in the market, I don't really see that changing, because I think there is still going to be the demand for really high quality data services. Now, I think the nature of what we do is going to be different, and as the vendors kind of decide their sort of future and decide their relationship with support, things are going to flex a little bit. But I can see, I think that kind of time frame of sort of 5 to 10 years is going to accelerate forward. One of the interesting things about working in a local authority is that it's very difficult to know the true cost to serve, because you've got this organisation, when you're in a large authority of sort of tens of thousands of employees, and so actually setting the overheads can be quite a challenge. So quite often we used to find that teams were trading and thought that they were covering their own costs, but the reality is that they weren't. But I think as the kind of financial pressures on local authorities really, really grow now, there's going to be some sort of more sort of involved questions about, is this really washing its face? If not, so I can see in the next couple of years that sadly the smaller sort of support units looking to be kind of consumed by the larger ones. And actually, that could be positive for the market. We want schools to get great quality support, and I think this kind of perfect storm we're seeing is going to compromise that in the next couple of years. So I think it's really important schools have choice, value, and excellent sort of support. And I think a kind of an initial consolidation of the smaller players is going to kind of aid that. And I think perhaps in the next I can see it happening quite quickly, Nick, actually, that particularly if certain vendors bring sort of support in-house, I think it's going to accelerate. If people are reliant on sort of one product, it's going to accelerate that faster. So I think we could probably, my crystal ball is telling me that in the next 5 years, it's going to look completely different.
Yeah, no, I can understand that, absolutely. And you're right. I think, it strangely, because obviously we started at the beginning from, we talked about the Sims sort of aspect of it. And I think Sims have almost throughout the last couple of years have actually accelerated it in lots of different ways. From the fact that basically the contracts now directly with the schools. They've got rid of the FM, which some of these things I think are actually needed. But I think, unfortunately, I think the timing and the way they delivered and drove those changes, unfortunately, I think have impacted on them and support teams as well. So I agree. I think there will be a consolidation. I think teams like yourselves, I think will we'll hold back the storm, as it were, and survive. And you'll probably be one of the 6 or 7. What about your vision for where you want to take your team? I know your team's big in the sense of 6, but where would you want? Where are you planning to take your vision going forward?
So I think seeing MIS as a standalone is again a thing of the past, and I think looking with a far broader technology lens is sort of where we're going now. I mean, we're really fortunate in our organisation that we have got this sort of one-stop shop, if you like. So we're able to work with our equivalents in sort of education services, our teaching and learning advisors. And to me, great ed tech is never ed tech for ed tech's sake. It's about having a toolbox and being and for kind of practitioners in the classroom to be able to draw on the right tools. I mean, I think the future is really, it's frightening but exciting. So I think the kind of current predicament schools are facing, it's squeezing the vulnerable students, it's squeezing the sort of pupil premium students, and the only way we're going to make this work is to move to things like personalised curriculums, and that is enabled through technology. So I see us as being kind of an enabler of the future, and perhaps, I know we talk about inclusive education, but it strikes me it's becoming less and less inclusive all the time, and actually that's going to be the key to sort of making sure that we are meeting the needs of all of our learners as the kind of resource envelope gets tinier and tinier. So I think that's something. I mean, obviously we're huge cloud advocates in HFL education. I think there's a lot of work to be done with schools around getting them up to the cloud and sort of realizing that any time, any place access and all the advantages that brings, and just the kind of the potential for kind of communicating with parents and just and students, and just making everything that much easier. And as I said, the other thing we're getting really passionate about is the use of data in schools, and let's really keen that we work as a team to make sure that our schools are data rich, information rich, and not data rich, information poor. That's really, really important, because things like pupil premium, that SEND, race equity, these things really, really matter. I'm really, really passionate about making sure that we have equity in schools, not just equality, but also for teachers. I mean, it's such a difficult job. It's not one I would want to take on, and I'm really passionate about using technology and data and information to make their lives better, but also to improve themselves, because we use data all the time, to really improve our practice. And when we're talking about some of those unconscious biases you may have, you can't see them unless you sort of see the data behind it and the impact you're having. So yeah, I think there's lots of places for us to go, and I see us I guess taking a step up really, and sort of starting to move away from this transactional support that we provide to schools, and much more being a sort of strategic business partner to schools around sort of maximising their use of technology and affecting meaningful school improvement through the effective use of data.
I think that is absolutely brilliant and spot on. From my perspective, you being a partner, I think you said the exact words I was going to use as well, which is being that partner. I think that the thing is, you're absolutely there's absolutely no way in a million years schools have the time, or teachers have the time, or heads have the time to focus on let's stop for 5 minutes, and let's look at sort of how technology can support and basically save time and energy and money and all those things, which I think is exactly what, the new support needs to be from an IT perspective. It needs to move away from the sort of, well, you need to push this button on Sims, or you need to do X, Y, and Z, and move to that sort of, right, what are your real pain points? Where have you got a problem? Well, we've got a problem with money, which they all have, and then work out how to say that. That could be something through cloud. Can you say, gets rid of servers, blah, 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 blah. And also same with carbon, and sort of climate change and meeting their net zero at some point. All these big problems, I think they're what the problems that you guys can solve. And I think, that's exactly what schools should be understanding that you can deliver, for sure. Because I definitely have heard, situations of other support teams where, as soon as something moves and goes to somewhere like Arbor or a Bromcom, then they sort of go, well, you're a sim support team, so that's you done. And you go, wow, they are so associated in some cases that you've got to move away from that. You've got to be, almost the systems. It doesn't really matter. It's about the process rather than the actual system that sits underneath.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing. Data is data, and when Rachel and I talk about data democratization, I mean, utopia looks like joining all your systems together in a school. So your kind of, your HR system is talking to your finance system, which is talking to your, sort of MIS. But the reality is we're not there yet. So yes, we've got some great products out there like Bromcom that have sort of joined the MIS and the finance together that are cloud-based, but we're yet to really kind of break through and have an all singing, all dancing integrated system, or systems that, you've got things like one that kind of are starting to integrate, but we're not quite there. But we don't need to be quite there, because there's so much stuff that we aren't kind of maximizing or kind of capitalizing on yet that could really make a difference in schools. So I think you're right. And it comes back to your original point about sort of marketing. So yeah, these teams are going to have to be able to sell their wares and showcase and demonstrate how they're able to do this, which is why, things like Arborfest actually, and getting support teams involved in sort of presenting there is a lifeline for support teams actually, and kind of, building those relationships with your partners, whether those partners are schools or whether they're the vendors, and being able to kind of all work together to create a new kind of, you talk about sort of symbiosis. We need a new kind of micro environment where, we all understand what each other can bring to the table. Because if the vendors want to provide support in-house to schools, and that's the right thing to do, then that's great. We should support them to do that. And we need to find a niche that's going to sort of add value, because it strikes me that there's plenty of value to be added, and we just all need to find our sort of seat at the table, if you like. But there's enough seats for us to all be comfortable.
It's interesting, because the way I see it is, you're almost that trusted partner between the schools and all these vendors. Because there's so many, how's the school really going to understand? I know they can go for procurement, but like you say, you've already created a framework. But there's lots of, you can sort of go, you can easily see yourselves, because they already do trust you. And I can, and so, and the partners, the vendors trust you. So there's this sort of, like you say, symbiotic, this different sort of different sort of ecology. No.
No, that's right. We've got 550 schools in Hertfordshire, and we work with a lot of schools beyond Hertfordshire's boundaries, and love doing that. And you kind of, a number of times you sort of scratch your head, and there are things that you can see all schools are grappling with. And so reinventing the wheel 550 times is not efficient. So I think you're right. It's things like procurement, for example. Every school in the country going off and sort of running a procurement for MIS strikes me as absolutely colossal waste of time. Let's reinvest that time back into the classroom, and let's use some of the trusted experts out there that do understand the market. They understand what a great MIS looks like. But it's also the kind of converse of that, where you've got every organisation believes it's special and different, and kind of the same with schools now. Every school is unique, don't get me wrong, but actually where we've got off the shelf products, we don't need to be bespoking them. We've kind of 80% of the sort of the functionality is in there, and you need to change your processes to meet an off the shelf product. And I think for many years we all tried to bespoke everything, and I think when you talk about that original sort of support unit relationship, it sort of struck me that the bigger support units had a bigger clout, and perhaps some of the changes they wanted to see, they were able to use and exert that influence a bit more readily. But in this new world, I don't, I think that of course every vendor's got a development map, and they're kind of willing to listen to customers and will put sensible developments on there. But we're not going to be able to kind of bend these systems in a way that perhaps we used to.
Yeah.
So again, I think sort of schools accepting, okay, look, I've got a choice of 1, 2, or 3 in terms of off-the-shelf products, and I've got this kind of support team over here that have kind of put together a framework. They know what they're doing. Actually, we'll sort of draw off them. But I think, the days of painstakingly drawing up a spec that, goes into massive detail about the specific needs of your school, you're just going to end up with an off-the-shelf product anyway in the current market. So, I think there are definite sort of efficiencies of using support teams in the right way, and kind of, let's leave the kind of support teams and the procurement experts to what they do, and let's get the schools doing what they do brilliantly, which is, outstanding teaching and learning.
Yeah. Well, it all comes back to, doesn't it? It's almost like stop trying to solutionize, allow the people who know, like yourselves, to solutionize. Just tell us the need, tell us the problem you have, and we'll find the right solution to meet that need. Don't try and solutionize when you don't have the expertise of doing so, really. Yeah, man, amazing. So this is my final question. I didn't, and I'm not even told you I was going to say this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. A little bit. So just for people who are just listening, we normally at least share some subject. We don't really ask questions. It's like a subject, but I didn't even say I was going to even do this one. But so apologies. But what I suppose what I'm interested in is my final sort of area, because I think there's so much going on. What are the things that you want? What do you want from the market? What do you want, fellow support teams to be thinking? Do you want them to be talking more openly with you? Do you want vendors to act in a particular way? How do you want this market to work with you, and what your vision is?
Oh, that's a great question. I think in terms of education, it's a cliche, but it's a bit of a family, isn't it? And I think, particularly this sort of, ed tech and MIS is a bit of a niche sector. And I think, we know who the movers and shakers and influencers are. We kind of all know who the larger sort of support teams are. And I think that there is actually quite a lot of sort of camaraderie. I think, my understanding, Nick, is that, look, of course, we talk behind the scenes, we talk with other people. I think we all kind of know which direction this is moving in. What do I want? I want schools to be getting the best possible service, choice, value. I don't want to be operating in a kind of litigious environment where you're frightened of sort of saying what you think, because you and sort of retain that independence, because there's always the kind of threat of litigation. I think sometimes we forget that we're here to serve schools, and that what they're doing is getting increasingly harder. So I think I want everyone to work together for the good of the schools, to make sure that actually we are affecting positive change in education. We're playing we all kind of come into education because we want to make education better. Whether we're a teacher on the front line, or kind of, whether we're sort of involved in developing MIS products, or whether we're involved in supporting them. So I think, let's not lose sight of that. I love it when I meet sort of like-minded organisations that you can work really well with. And I think to me, that's about, working together to innovate, to be open, to bounce off each other, not being afraid that, you might run off with my IP, or, I think so I think this sort of sense of community has to endure, and I think it will. And I think, crikey, COVID was really challenging, and we sort of saw the worst of the world, if you like, but also I think we saw some of the best of the world. And I think the way that the ed tech sector came together, and you saw vendors offering their products for free. Now, don't get me wrong, obviously in the hope that schools then take them up in the longer term. I'm not that naive, but there was that kind of will, I think, to actually to make this work and make it happen. And I think I'd like to see that endure, really. So yeah, I think it's about creating a healthy kind of environment and sector where we can all coexist, but also sort of speak our minds with sort of relative freedom, and call things out when they're not right, and have the kind of ability to do that. And as you've got people like Josh out there that I really admire, because I think, have sought to do that in a kind of productive way. So yeah, I hope that we continue to work together. And I think, look, as geographical boundaries break down, MATs don't respect geographical boundaries, because they don't need to. They are kind of national organisations. So the concept of a geographical team, therefore, is going to naturally be a thing of the past, and we will start to come into competition with one another. But that's not to say that we need to become fierce enemies. We've got to find a way of sort of working together for the good of schools. So yeah, I think for me, it's always that question about, well, how is this going to benefit schools? And I think as we move forward as a subsector, that's what we've got to be asking ourselves. And sort of when I'm looking at, okay, who do I really want to work with? Why do I want to get out of bed in the morning? It's going to be the people that I think share that philosophy.
I'm fully agreeing with you. I've been in this market for 20 odd years, and it's the fundamental reason why most people stay in this market is all the same reason, and that is because we all care. And I agree with you. When there's anything that basically sucks any form of money away from the final person, that child, then unfortunately I think as a market we find that very, very distasteful. So I agree. I think we need to maintain that camaraderie, that willing to move forward together, and and accept, we're all in competition as well, so one way or another at some point, but actually it's a friendly relationship still.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. A massive thank you for your time. That's really, really insightful, and it's been brilliant. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's been a real pleasure, Nick. And and obviously that if anyone out there wants to come and chat about the sort of future of the sector, and as they see it, they're more than welcome. And obviously a little plug for our multi-supplier framework in HFL, which is open to local authorities and support teams to come and call off. So you can buy your licenses from us and continue to provide support yourselves. So yeah, I think we've tried to set our stall out to sort of to work with others, and yeah, hopefully that gets reciprocated.